Hello, class. This is the lecture for Chapter 2 of CIT 171. In this lecture, we're going to be discussing how to set up your Just Lead Books database in Oracle, and then also how to do some basic select queries using the SQL Plus tool. So to start out with, we can go ahead and open SQL Plus. There's a couple of ways you can open it. You can just type in SQL Plus into the search bar and bring it up that way, or you can go to your Start menu, navigate to the Oracle folder, and then open up SQL Plus there. Now, before we get further into this video, you need to have followed the instructions in the class to go ahead and set up your schema for Scott, or your user called Scott. So there are instructions in Blackboard that will walk you through how to actually create a user called Scott with a password of Tiger, and then grant certain permissions to that user so that we can actually create the database. Because in this video, we're going to be connecting to the Oracle database using that Scott user and creating the database tables under the Scott schema. So make sure you've completed that before you start and continue on in this video. So for now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and enter my username, which I created in the previous steps that I just mentioned, called Scott. And I'll hit enter, and then I'm going to enter my password of Tiger, T-I-G-E-R, hit enter, and it's going to connect me to the Oracle database. Now, from here, what I want to do is I want to set up the Just Lead Books database. So how do I do that? You need the student data files for your textbook. So I will post an announcement about this in Blackboard, but they're also here under the Week 1 folder. You just follow the link, go over here on the left side to data files, download this zip file, and when you unzip it, what I would do to make it as easy as possible is to go directly to your C drive on your computer, create a new folder called CIT 171 with no spaces. You can add spaces if you want, but I would just leave no spaces, and unzip the SQL files, they're in .sql, into this folder. Now these files are what you're going to be using for the rest of the semester to build your database. And depending on the chapter, so this is for chapter 5, chapter 8, chapter 9, you'll need to run these files at the beginning of the chapter before you do your homework. So for our purposes, we're going to be using the jldb_build.sql or .sql file. So let's go ahead and take a look at what's inside that file. I'm going to open it in a program called Notepad++. Now, in this, let me scroll to the top. In this file, what you'll see are a bunch of SQL statements. And what this is doing is it's creating tables and inserting data into those tables. You can see here it's creating the table called customers. It's adding specific fields with specific data types and specific constraints. For example, these fields cannot be null. And some additional constraints with primary keys. And once it creates that table, it then inserts data into the customer table. And these are the values. So it's inserting a list of customers into that table. And as you scroll down through, you'll see it creates the orders table and the publisher table and the author table, so on and so forth, and the books table. These are building all of the database tables for your Just Lead Books database that we will be using for the rest of the semester. So it's very important that we run this script to create the database. So how do we actually create the database? If you go back over to your SQL Plus screen, once you've logged in as the Scott user and you're at the SQL prompt, you're going to type a command that says start, and then you're going to type in the path of the jldb_build.sql file. Now, the instructions on how to do this are also on page 28 of your textbook. So if you are following along in your textbook, you can go there and see the same thing. So I'm going to do C:\CIT171, which is the folder I just created. And I'm going to type in jldb_build.sql. Now, when I push enter here, what you'll see is that it's going to start creating a bunch of rows. It will say table created, one row created, and from here, it's actually created all of these tables and executed this SQL script in here and created all of the tables for your Just Lead Books database. Now, From here, we're going to use this SQL Plus tool, this command line tool, for the first several weeks of the class. Around week 8 or 9, we're going to switch to a tool called SQL Developer. SQL Developer is much more, I would say, user-friendly. It's much more easier to look at. But I think it's important for you to start out with the command line tool to really, you know, get your feet wet with Oracle and running SQL code. And then once we get and have some more advanced queries that we'll be running, we'll switch over to the GUI or the SQL Developer tool to run some of those more advanced queries. So from here, let's run a couple of simple queries or commands just to kind of take a look at our database. So for example, we can do the DESC, which is short for describe, the describe command, and type in describe customers and hit enter. That's going to show us a list of all of the fields and the data types for that table. So we can see in here, this matches what we just ran in our SQL script. So we have the customer number, last name, first name, address, so on and so forth. You can see where the last name cannot be null and the first name cannot be null. Now, why is customer number not null either? You don't see the not null up here in the script. Well, the reason is that customer number is actually the primary key. And as you should know from previous database classes, most likely, and our previous chapter in chapter 1, primary keys cannot be null. Then over here, you can see in the data types, you can see that customer number is a number that's 4 characters long, or 4 digits long, I should say. varchar2, 10 characters, varchar2, 10 characters. So these describe the data types. We can also do a data description of, let's say, the books database, or sorry, the books table. You can see there's an ISBN number, that's the primary key, title, publish date, pub ID. So whenever you get in here, I would encourage you to start looking at the table structure of a lot of these tables to kind of familiarize yourself with how the tables are laid out. There's also, I think in your book, it will have a data model and a data layout of all the tables in your book, or all the tables that are in your database. It will be in your book, so you can also reference it there. Okay, so from here, I want to show you how to run some basic SQL queries in SQL Plus. We're not going to get too advanced here, but these will help you out when you're doing your homework for this week on Chapter 2. So let's say we just wanted to select all the customers that are in the customers table. The way we do that is we type the select command. We type an asterisk, which means select all, or select everything in the table, from, and then the table name, customers, and that's it. Now, in SQL Plus, you always need to be using a semicolon at the end of your select statements or your queries. Okay, if you don't use a semicolon, SQL Plus doesn't know that you are ending your SQL statement, and it will just skip to a new line. So until you put the semicolon in, the query will not actually execute. So if I go ahead and hit enter here, you can see that it brought back several records from the customers table. And you can see at the top here, it has customer number, last name, first name, address, city, state, zip, referred. These are the column names. And in the command line tool, it doesn't look super pretty. And there's ways that you can actually adjust this so that all the columns will fit onto the screen without wrapping around. But for our purposes, we don't really need to know that for now. We're just mainly focused on being able to run the select statements and the basic queries. When we start using the SQL Developer tool, it's in a much prettier and easier to read format. So as you can see, each record of the table is listed on here. So customer 1001, that customer number is Bonita Morales. There's her address, East Point, Florida 32328. So this is a list of all of the customers in the customer table. We can also do the same thing for the books table. Select all from books. Run that, and now we get a list of all of the books, the ISBN number, the title, the publish date, so on and so forth. All is in here, the cost, the discount, the category as fitness for this particular bodybuilding book. So that's how you do a basic select all. Now I'm going to show you really quickly what happens when you don't add your semicolon. If I was to do select all from books again, but I don't use the semicolon, I just hit enter here. You see how it goes to number 2? I can actually hit enter again and nothing happens. It doesn't execute. Again, it doesn't execute until you actually put the semicolon in. Sometimes people like to say select all on the first line, hit enter, and then from books on the second line. And you could even have a third line if you wanted to and put the semicolon in, and then it will execute. But until you put the semicolon, it's not going to execute in C++. So it's very important that you remember to do that. Now, a couple of other things. Let's say on the books table, I only wanted to select one field. I just wanted to select the title of the book. I simply say select title. Move my mouse so you can see. Select title from books and run that. And now you see I only get the title of the books. Bodybuild in 10 minutes a day. And there you go. So then if you wanted to select 2 fields, let's say I wanted to select the title and the publish date, I could type in select title, comma, pub date from books and semicolon. And now I get the title and the publish date. Let's say I don't like the way it says pub date and I want it to actually say publish date, the full words. I can do what's called an alias. I can say select pub date, and then in quotes next to it, you can use an as. Some people like to say select pub date as published date. You can also just say select pub date published date with double quotes from books. Now you can see, and again, SQL Plus will cut it off. It will be different when we get to SQL Developer, but it will actually alias that field name. So what that means is that instead of it showing pub date at the top, it's going to show what I aliased it as, which is published date. Okay. Let's see what else. I think that's really it for now. If you also want to do, let's talk really quickly, I guess, maybe about where clauses as well. So let's say I want to, let's go back to the customer table. Let's do select all from customer again. Oops, I had a syntax error. So it looks like I didn't have an S on the end of my customers table. So you can see I spelled it as customer, which I don't think that's the name of the table. I think it's customers. So let's try that again. That worked that time. So select all from customers. Let's say I just want to get a list of the customer numbers, or a list of customers who have the first name of Ryan. So I should get Ryan Thompson, I think would be the only one. You can use a where clause in your SQL statement. Select all from customers where first name equals Ryan. Now when I run that, you see it only pulled back the one record that's in that table where the first name is equal to Ryan. Let's try one more thing really quickly. Oh, and by the way, I just got that query to pop back up quickly by just hitting the up key on my keyboard. So you can actually scroll back through and go back down. You can do up and down and scroll through the previous queries that you've run. Let's say I just want to type it as lowercase Ryan. Let's see if this works as well. Notice that it says no rows selected. That's because Oracle is case sensitive. So whenever you're running a SQL query and you're doing a where clause, you need to be mindful that the data in the database is case sensitive. So it could not find the name Ryan because Ryan is stored in the database in all capital letters. So if I run this again, I could even type it capital R-Y-A-N. It doesn't find it. But if I do it one more time and I type it in all caps, then it pulls back the record. So something to keep in mind as you're going through, if you're doing select queries and you're doing a where clause on a field that's a varchar, meaning it's a string, it has letters, it's alphanumeric, it's not just a number or a date or something like that, it's going to be case sensitive. So you have to be very mindful of that because you won't get any records back unless you use the exact case. All right. So that's where clauses. I taught you how to select all, select a single or multiple fields by listing the fields out separated by commas, and I also taught you how to alias um, the field name. Now, again, if you wanted to go back and look at the list of fields in a particular table, describe orders, you can, again, do that by using the describe command. When you're using the describe command, you don't need the semicolon, by the way. It's whenever you're doing a select, an insert, some of those DML types of commands. But a describe or connect or things like that, you typically don't need a semicolon. So I described the orders table. It shows me all of the fields that are in that table and their data types and whether or not they can be null. Okay, so I think that's it for now. This should be able to get you through Chapter 2. Please, as always, email me if you have any questions on your homework or you have any issues getting the database created. Just remember you want to log in as the Scott user, not as sysdba. So you want to make sure that you connect as Scott so that these tables are created under the Scott user. So make sure you follow those instructions on creating the Scott user prior to trying to create your database. If you have any problems, give me a shout. Thanks for your time. I'll talk to you all soon.